realize that the film was going to become anything near as iconic as it has?
No, I mean, who knows? Even if you're used to making films and you have some idea of what a script is going to turn into, you never can predict that. You never can be quite sure what the director is going to turn the script into to begin with. And then there's no way to predict in a movie like Chainsaw that the elements would come together the way they did and that the public would respond to the movie the way they did. So I had no idea. My dream for this movie was, I thought, if 5 years from now, a few hardcore horror fans remember it, that'll be the greatest thing in the world. That's all I could hope for, I thought. I thought that would be the biggest that we would get from this movie.
And then when the movie became successful and when you realized, wow, this is actually a phenomenon now, when did you first realize that and how did you react to that?
It was obvious very quickly that it was going to be huge. The things that happened were the Philadelphia Inquirer ran 2 front-page stories about the movie saying that people in the audience for the screenings or in the theater were vomiting. They were throwing up in the theater and demanding their money back. And I thought, you can't get better press than this. And then Johnny Carson, the host of The Tonight Show, one of the most powerful men at the time in LA, in Hollywood, I was watching the show one night and he starts ranting about Chainsaw Massacre, saying, how dare they make a movie like this? It should have an X rating. They shouldn't allow movies like this to be made without an X rating. At the time, X was just adult, it wasn't porn. And I thought, all the better. And then, after all of this uproar and anger over the movie, Rex Reed, who was a very influential film reviewer in New York, reviewed Chainsaw and said, this is the scariest movie I've ever seen. And those 3 things coming together, I think, really sealed the fate of the movie. Because then you had all of this adverse publicity. I mean, it's like the Catholic Church. When the Catholic Church tells you you can't go see this movie because it's evil, they've just added $100 million to the receipts. So when you have these people telling you this is a really brutally bad movie, you should never go, all it does is promote the movie. Harper's Magazine, which is a pretty big magazine in America, ran a cover story called The Pornography of Violence. And they focused particularly on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and called it a vile little piece of sick crap with literally nothing to recommend it. And I thought, another $100 million. So.
I mean, it's an amazing time. I mean, the film just spawned this incredible cult phenomenon. I mean, how much of an impact, though, did it have on you personally in your career?
Well, at first it had none, because I really did the movie because I thought it would be an interesting summer job.
Yeah.
We did Chainsaw. I went back to graduate school. I finished graduate school. Chainsaw came out in my last year of graduate school. I finished grad school, moved to Maine. I live on an island. I live on the same island I've lived on since I moved there in 1975. And I just settled down and started writing, which is always what I wanted to do for a living. So I really had no idea what Chainsaw had become until I kept being asked to be in movies. And I got a call from Bob Burns, who was the art director of Chainsaw. And he said, I'm living in LA now, and I've met this guy, and nobody knows him. His name is Wes Craven.
Wow.
He's going to be big. He's making a movie we'd like you to be in. Can you be in LA in 2 weeks? What's the name of the movie, I say? And he goes, The Hills Have Eyes. And I say, no, I'm not making movies. And so I turned down Hills Have Eyes, and I turned down other movies. And finally, in 1987, I thought, this is really silly. I need to go out to LA, because I got a phone call from a friend who was directing movies. I say it with a laugh because it was Fred Ray. I don't know if you're familiar with Fred's movies. So I went to LA and shot a movie called Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers. And when he called me and said, will you be in this movie? I said, not until I read the script. And he said, it's in rewrite, meaning there is no script, and there won't be a script unless you agree to be in the movie. So I said, okay, I'll come out, but I won't sign the contract until I read the script. So I came out and did this movie. And it was really when I was in LA that I realized how big Texas Chain Saw Massacre had become. And the reason I realized it was they sent someone to pick me up at the airport who was not on the crew. It was just a guy they hired to pick me up. So we're filming, and on the second day of filming, one of the actors comes over to me, this woman, and she says to me, "You know, you're really a nice guy." And I said, "What?" She said, "Well, you know, you're so famous, and the character you played is so brutal. We all figured you were an asshole." And then I realized that not a single person had spoken to me the entire first day of shooting unless we had a scene together. And so I realized that these people really were afraid of me because of the stature of Chainsaw Massacre. And that was the first clue I had that Chainsaw was as big as it was. Because I really, you know, I went on with my life. I was doing what I wanted to do, and I wasn't paying any attention to any of this. A few years later, a couple of years later, you know, there was this American TV show called Cheers. And there's an episode in which the Kirstie Alley character has been asked to house sit a big house in the country for a weekend. And so the entire show is she is lording it over everyone at the bar that she's going to spend the weekend at this estate. So the last scene is she's now there, it's getting dark, and she hears noises. She gets nervous, and she runs around and locks all the doors and all the windows. And the last part of the movie is she's sitting in the living room, and she hears a noise, and her last line is, "Oh, Leatherface, I hope that's not you." And then I thought, wow, they don't have to explain who Leatherface is in this movie. So that's when I realized the movie had entered the culture, that you can't pick up a chainsaw now without thinking of the movie. You can't say the word Leatherface without having everybody know just what you're talking about, even though they're not horror movie fans. And I think that really brought home how big Chainsaw had become.
And for you, you said you've been indulging in your writing since then, and so what kind of things can people buy your books from you now on your website and things like that?
My last book is out of print finally. I wrote for magazines for many, many years, and in fact, I stopped writing for magazines only after I did Hookers, and since then I've been writing documentary films, and I've done a few books, but like I say, they're not available now. The last one, and I write some screenplays. I've been lucky enough to sell 2 screenplays, but I've never had anything produced. That's the great part of Hollywood, you know. Only one script in 10 that's sold. For every 10 scripts that someone buys, only one gets made into a movie. So I've been lucky enough to sell a couple, but I've never had anything I've made produced.
I mean, in terms of then writing for movies now, I mean, what do you think has changed over the last few years in the actual way it's...
Well, it's hard for me to say because I'm really at the periphery, you know. But my experience is that producers are very afraid of taking a chance. I'm amazed sometimes to see the kind of movies that get made. You know, who approved this script? And that really appalls me. At the same time, people are very afraid, and I think that's part of the reason that some of these movies get made. It's a series of tired ideas that have been parts of other movies that were successful. I'm not taking much of a chance on this. And I think that's what people do more and more. I think the real creative work, most of it's coming from independents, small budget. You know, the best horror is coming from small budget independent pictures. Some guy managed to raise $10 or $20 or $50,000 or $100,000, which is a tiny budget in Hollywood terms, and make a movie. And that movie has a much better chance of being a terrifically good movie, a movie that changes horror than any big budget horror movie. Chainsaw Massacre, the budget was $80,000. We don't know how much money it's made. Our guess is that it's made something over $200 million. Not that we see any of that. I mean, so I think it's a lot of times as more money becomes involved, as you bring more money into the mix, the producers get less and less creative and more conservative about what they're willing to do. But I think there's great stuff coming out in small budget. And it's not just small budget horror. I think a lot of the creativity in the movie business is in the small budget stuff.
And don't forget, if you have a question for Gunnar, please feel free to stick your hand up, and he will answer any questions that you can. Now, one of the things you've done, because you originally were from Reykjavik, weren't you? You moved over here when you were moved to the States, sorry, when you were age 5.
Yeah.
Have you ever been back to Iceland since then? And I believe you went back and something to do with the Reykjavik whale watching massacre.
Yeah, I did. I went back. I used to go back every second year and spend the summer with my father. And then in recent years, I try to go back every year as I can. So I had a chance to work on this movie, Reykjavik Whale Watching Massacre, which it's the biggest budget I'd ever worked on in a movie. And it was wonderful. I mean, the script is very, very good script. It's a novelist who's very well known as a straight novelist who wrote the script for this. It has the potential for being a very frightening movie. It's a very gritty, dirty-looking movie, which I think is great. I mean, it really has that grimy feel to it. And it was a great luxury to work on this film in which I have a death scene, and it's 3 pages. I mean, I don't spend 3 pages dying, but the whole scene in which my character is killed is 3 pages long. And my death, they took 3 days to film my death in that movie.
Wow.
Now, let me compare that. I left that film, came back to the States, and worked on a movie in which I had 9.5 pages of dialogue. And they wanted me for 1 day. And I said to the director, you can't film 9.5 pages of dialogue in a day. You need at least 2 days if you're fast. On Reykjavik Massacre, they averaged a page a day because there were a lot of things, a lot of details that had to be shot. And the director of this other movie called Wonton Baby said, oh no, we're really fast. We shot 9.5 pages of dialogue in 3.5 hours.
Wow.
And I'd never heard of that. I mean, and of course the way they did it was they set up 3 cameras, and if you make a mistake, you just keep going. You just go back to the beginning of your line and keep going. So they shoot the entire scene twice, and then they just cut it together. And it's a sloppy way to shoot, but you can get away with it. But with the film like Reykjavik Whale Watching Massacre, we actually had the luxury of doing everything perfectly. We'd do it over and over and over again until they had it exactly the way they wanted it. And I think it allows for some really quality stuff in the movie. I haven't seen the movie. My agent went to see it at a screening in New York, in LA last November, and he really liked it. He said nobody walked out, which is, well, it's an industry screening. It's a film market. It's like Cannes, or it's the American film market, where there are buyers who watch a movie. So it's only buyers, and he says there are 12 people if you're lucky, and they leave after 10 minutes because once they decide they don't want it, they don't bother to waste their time, so they leave. And he said there were 12 people at the screening of Reykjavik Whale Watching Massacre, and not a single person left. So
Wow.
I took that as a pretty good sign. And I think it's a good movie. I mean, having read the script and been part of that filming for that period, I was very impressed with it.
And do we have any news on when we might see it?
I have no idea. Last fall, they signed a deal with a British distributor for UK and I think European continent. So I'm surprised it isn't out already in the UK, and I'm hoping it'll be out here in the next few months. I suspect it'll be released here before it's released in the US. And
you still continue working as an actor, as you said, but how do you find it difficult then to avoid being typecast? Do you just turn the roles down out of just say, I'm not going to do that, or?
No, first of all, I don't mind being typecast because, as Kane Hodder, Jason, once said, better typecast than not cast. And I think, most people who are working as actors are glad for the work. And so you don't mind being typecast because it gets you work. The only reason people are interested in me as an actor in their films is because I played Leatherface. So it doesn't bother me at all that people want me because of that movie. I have been lucky enough to get a couple of films where I played a different kind of character. And this one that came out last year called Brutal Massacre, a comedy, and was a very funny movie. And I was very lucky to be in that movie in a comic role. I played a character named Fetkovich, who after the film was edited, the director admitted to the lawyers that there was a real Fetkovich, so my name magically became Crenshaw in the movie because Fetkovich would have sued them, it turned out. And the premise of the movie, it's about a film director who is incompetent, and all his movies are a bomb, and this is his last chance. It's what they call a mockumentary. It's a fake documentary, and it's about the making of this movie, and he realizes that if this movie is not a big success, he'll never make another movie. And everything that can go wrong does. And it's based on the director's experience making his first movie. And my character is a burned-out Vietnam vet who thinks he's the coolest guy in town, and he's not. And he tries to pull a scam on the producers of this film. So I was lucky to be involved with that, where I got to play an entirely different personality from Leatherface. Not that I mind playing brutal, crazed killers. It's the real me.
We have a question for this young man here.
Hiya. It's gone now. There have been so many references made towards Texas Chain Saw Massacre over the years. I mean, for instance, in Pulp Fiction, before Bruce Willis picks up a samurai sword, he picks up a chainsaw. How do you personally feel knowing that you were a part of something that was such a huge inspiration to people like Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez?
I think it's great. I mean, I'm really lucky that I got to be part of a movie that had such an effect. And it's, to me, delightful whenever I'm watching a movie and there's some sly reference or not so sly reference to Chainsaw Maid. I think it's great. And I really am pleased that, and I'm the first to admit, it's pure luck on my part, It was not my genius that made that movie. I was just part of a group of people who made a movie that was much more than its parts. If you'd removed anything from that movie, it would not have worked. So, it makes me laugh. I just think, who would have thought, All I wanted in my life I wanted to, just go off somewhere and write, and if I couldn't do that, just let me be a college professor in some little college somewhere, So, to me, it's just a really delightful thing that, I did the movie originally because I thought someday I'm going to be able to tell my grandkids that your stuffy old grandpa was in a horror movie. I just thought, wouldn't that be great to say? So as Bruce Willis says in Who Knew?
We have time for one more question. So if you've got a burning question, oh, 2 questions, okay. Well, we'll let you have 2 then. Because we've got 2 people, so we'll go for this gentleman first.
Sorry?
You got a question? Yeah, go.
Horror films in the 70s, people would have been quite sensitive to gory horror films with lots of blood and guts. So therefore you had they would label these films as video nasties. Well, how did you feel being in a film that was seen as so controversial at the time? I mean, how did how did you feel being part of a film as controversial for its time, like Texas Chain Saw Massacre?
Well, it never bothered me at all. I mean, to me, better to be involved with something that people are offended by than something that people don't even react to. And I was proud of the movie. I thought everybody who did it did a great job. And if people wanted to be angry and offended by it, my feeling was that was their problem, not mine. And so the fact that the movie was controversial, the fact that it was not licensed in the UK, it was licensed in London only. So it showed, when it was released in '74, it showed in Piccadilly Circus. That's it. And after that, nobody would license it. To see it in England, I had to go to the National Film Museum. It's okay to show it at the National Film Museum, who acknowledges the film, but you can't see it in England. And and so to me, the part that I was not happy with is that someone thinks they have the right to tell someone else what movies they can watch. And I don't know if do you know how it was that Chainsaw Massacre got its license in the UK? Do you know what the head of the censorship board said? He said, it's okay for people like you and me to see this movie. What would happen if we allowed auto workers in Birmingham to see it? But that ended his career. He had to leave his job, and the censorship board was so embarrassed that they had to license the movie. If he had not said that stupid thing, this movie still would be banned in the UK. So.
Wow. We got time for one question here, Mr. Young lady.
Thank you. You've written one book that I know of, Islands. I was just wondering if you're in the process of writing any others.
I am. I'm writing a novel, and it's one of those things where, you know that joke, oh, how are you going along? How are you doing on that novel of yours? I work on it when I don't have paying work, which lately, by the way, is a lot of time. And it's a novel, I've been working on it for a few years, and whenever I have a block of 2 or 3 months, I work on it. And originally it was called Eight-Legged Horse. But I realized that the reference is so obscure that I've been calling, and it sounds sort of pretentious, so lately I've been calling it Silver Doctor. Silver Doctor is a type of fish. It's a wet fly for salmon fishing. Very popular in Iceland as a fishing fly. So, is it horror? No. It's just a novel about a guy who goes fishing and what he thinks about. So nobody will read it, you know.
Ladies and gentlemen, please
Thank
join
you.
me in giving a massive round of applause to the one and only Gunnar Hansen.
Thank you.